Well, let's take a closer look now at some stories in Behind the Headlines. The Washington Post reports on US President Joe Biden's arrival in Geneva. He's preparing for lengthy and contentious talks with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin on Wednesday. Britain's Financial Times reports on a trade deal between the UK and Australia, which has been agreed by Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his counterpart Scott Morrison. The scientist who led the biggest ever expedition to the Arctic has warned that global warming may have already passed an irreversible tipping point. That's featured in the news website Flipboard. And USA Today is running an update from Danish footballer Christian Eriksen, who says he is fine under the circumstances after suffering a cardiac arrest. My reviewers today are broadcaster and journalist Ryan Shilkut and broadcast journalist Lape Olarinoye. Good to see both of you guys. So let's dive straight in. The Biden-Putin summit in Geneva on Wednesday. Biden's already arrived. Ryan, it's not going to be a very friendly meeting, is it?
No, it's not going to be friendly. It never was going to be. It's probably not going to be amazingly eventful either. I think, if you look at the build up to this, it's been quite extraordinary compared to what I suspect will be a rather dull, rather business-oriented few hours with the two leaders, after which Biden's planning on popping out by himself for a press conference because he doesn't want to appear alongside Putin. I think it's been made into a huge event by the media, but in fact, it's just a sort of rather ordinary almost meeting despite all appearances.
Lape, what do you think? Ryan there thinking it's going to be quite a dull meeting. But as he says, there's always a lot of interest surrounding the meeting between these two very different leaders from the US, from Russia.
Well, I completely agree with Ryan. I don't think that there will be much rapport between the two leaders. I mean, we've seen the relationship between the Russian leader Vladimir Putin and American leaders, American presidents in particular, wane over time. I mean, in comparison to the relationship with former President Donald Trump, which was a lot different to the relationship that President Putin had with, let's say, for example, President Obama at the time. But if we look at previous Russian leaders, let's say, for example, Boris Yeltsin and Bill Clinton, they seem to have somewhat of a rapport. And if we look at Gorbachev and Reagan as well. But over time, the relationship between the leaders of both countries has really dwindled. And I don't expect to see that rapport take place at the summit, particularly because of all the issues that Russia and America have with each other at the moment, from cyber hacking to interference in elections and so on. So it'll be very interesting to see a glimmer of hope, but I seriously doubt it.
Yeah, I mean, by all accounts, it looks as though Joe Biden has got this sort of massive list of things that he's going to be bringing up with the Russian leader. And Ryan, I think it's really interesting that Joe Biden makes no attempt to hide what he thinks about Vladimir Putin. Apparently, he once looked Putin in the eye and said, "I don't think you have a soul." And he told a chat show host, that this guy is a killer. So he's making no bones about where he thinks Vladimir Putin's coming from.
Yeah, that's obviously following up after George W. Bush said that he'd looked President Putin in the eyes. This is going back in the early 2000s. I was at that summit. It was in St. Petersburg. I think it was a G7 summit, if I'm not mistaken. And he said he looked in Putin's eyes and said that, he had a soul and that he was someone he could trust. And then, of course, a couple of years later, he really regretted having said that at a press conference. Look, neither of these guys are particularly interested in the other liking them. They're not trying to strike up a friendship. I think for Russia, quite frankly, most of what they're going to get out of this meeting happens with the meeting itself, in the sense that the Russians want to be seen as a world power. And, they've been demonstrating all of this kind of attention-seeking behavior to get this meeting, and they got it. And so the Russians, well, it's sort of mission accomplished. For Biden, it's probably a bit more nuanced. I think he does want some things that he knows Vladimir Putin can help him on, and I wouldn't be shocked if Vladimir Putin does help him. Putin's a pragmatist, and you know, if it's in Russia's interest and in Putin's interest, then he will help where he can. And I think Biden, you know, he's been around enough years to know that you don't have to necessarily get along with people, like people, to get what you need out of them.
Well, let's move on to an agreement between two other leaders, and they did get on with this. This is the UK and Australia, the leaders signing a new trade deal. Lape, this is the first trade deal that the UK has built up from scratch since leaving the EU. Tell us more about this.
And a breakthrough at that. This is the first time, as you've rightly said, we've seen some form of an agreement with a trade deal since Brexit has happened. I mean, it's a clear step in the right direction. Although there are a lot of controversies about how this deal will affect British farmers in particular. But Liz Truss, the International Trade Secretary, has stated that, you know, this trade will be monitored and very well regulated. And over time, there will be kind of a 10-year protection scheme for British farmers when the exports and imports between the two countries go ahead. But this is essentially, you know, a form of reassurance for many Brits who have been really anxious about what the trade is going to be like, what access to the British market and the rest of the world will be like. I remember vividly during the campaign, during the pro-Brexit campaign, many of the Brexiteers, as they're known, really reassured British people that, you know, they have the whole world to trade with. And this is the first time that we've seen that. I mean, 5 years on, that we've seen that kind of progression take place. And hopefully this would open trade for the whole world between Britain and not just Europe. And I think for many people that did vote to leave the European Union, this is great news for them.
I was going to say, I know it's not a perfect deal. I mean, deals seldom are, but it does sort of make you breathe a sigh of relief that such deals are possible. And Ryan, as Lape says, this could pave the way for other trade deals for the UK.
I don't think so. I love the both of you, but I think that it's just look, it's a smokescreen. It means nothing. It's, you know, two people sat in a room.
Why does it mean nothing?
You know, the economic impact. The economic impact of this deal over the next 15 years is 0.2%.
It's going to cover goods such as cars, Scotch whiskey, always an important commodity, biscuits and ceramics.
Australian car? I mean, have you ever bought an Australian car? I certainly haven't. Look, the economic value of this is 0.2% over the next 15 years. The economic value of McDonald's closing in central London for a month is greater than this deal. It is a non-deal. It's a smokescreen. It's meaningless.
Well, what about this idea that it's going to let the UK join the wider Asia-Pacific Free Trade Agreement?
All that we get out of this, Shuli, is our Australian wine for 7p cheaper per bottle. It is absolutely
Don't forget beef, Ryan. Don't forget beef.
I mean, you know, I like my Australian wine, although it's a bit heavy. But this is nothing, right? This, as the UK forges its path forward into this post-pandemic, post-Brexit world, this will go down as one of the least significant developments along the way. The government has a lot of really, really serious things to attend to. This isn't one of them. They shot it out there right after the G7 because they know it's no big deal. They know we aren't gullible. And, you know, by tomorrow it'll be forgotten. And in a few years' time, we'll be eating Australian beef with more hormones in it. And we'll say, hey, that's tastier beef, but it won't be as, I guess, environmentally friendly as the stuff that we have here in the UK. That's really all you can say about it.
There goes the feel-good factor that I was hoping for in this discussion.
Oh, wow.
He's completely ruined it for us.
Let's move on to, actually, this is not a feel-good story. This is a very feel-bad story. The tipping point for irreversible global warming may have already been triggered. This is a warning from a scientist who led the longest expedition to the Arctic, dozens of scientists involved. Lape, this is very much not good news.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Sheila. This is awful news. And I think it really rains on the parade of a lot of climate change campaigners that have been, campaigning for us to change the way in which we live to preserve the planet and where we live. And I think expeditions like this have come back with, factual evidence, tangible evidence to suggest that actually all that hard work might not even be needed at all. And it's cost, a lot of money to go on this expedition and for them to come back with this information makes it very scary. I mean, there needs to be more in that report. Like, what else can we do? How bad has it gotten? And essentially, the report says it's irreversible. But how long is a piece of string? How irreversible is it? And have our efforts actually made any change whatsoever in the way in which we live? Of course, there's a long way to go in terms of changing our habits and saving the climate. But has all of that effort been futile? I think that's the question that a lot of people would want to know. And where do we go from here? I think at the moment...
But to be fair, I mean, we haven't really had a really aggressive climate change protection policies until relatively recently, right? So
the last couple of years.
Yes, so and we're hoping that there will be even stricter goals and aims set at the next climate change conferences. But I think what's really worrying is that this scientist is saying even if you have a really aggressive climate change protection laws put into place, it may still be too late. And that, of course, has an enormous knock-on effect on the rest of the country.
And I think, Julie, sorry to interrupt you, I think that is the real point of this, because many governments around the world are planning within the next 5 years to, have unleaded run cars and electric cars rather, as opposed to petrol fueled cars. And we're now, stopping to use plastic and using alternatives. And there's a lot of changes, and climate change is at the forefront of global politics at the moment. And if those efforts are somewhat futile, then what is the point of actually incorporating that into our governing bodies and the way we live? And I think that's the question that really needs to be answered. Where do we go from here now?
And I think that futility, and I don't know what you think about this, Ryan, but that futility just seems to be repeated every time we hear a story about icebergs melting, about Arctic ice retreating, about plants growing in the Antarctic where there've never been plants growing before. It just always seems like another nail in the coffin.
Yeah, I don't think he's trying to be overly negative or futile by making this pronouncement. I think he's just saying that, this idea that was agreed on in Paris, that we're going to hold temperature rises to no more than 1.5 degrees centigrade over the next, say, 20 years from where they were back in from pre-industrial levels, that may not happen anymore. And that means that we are now going down the slippery slope of a planet where things are going to get worse no matter what. And we are going to have the job is going to be to mitigate how bad things get. That's an important difference to what he's not saying, we shouldn't do anything. He's saying we need to do everything we can, but things are still going to get worse. And we just had the G7, and the leaders just failed to agree to not turn off their or not close down their coal plants, their coal mines rather. And I think that that's a pretty essential step in the whole process of trying to meet those Paris Agreement accords. And so that's what's going on here. He's just providing very negative information, but just because it's negative doesn't mean we can ignore it. Even if the situation is getting worse, we have to manage the downward trajectory, if you will, because we're still going to have to live with it. It's just that what he's saying is we may not be able to pull it back from the brink anymore. That's all.
Let's move on to our final story, which is a bit more upbeat. Thank goodness. This is Denmark's Christian Eriksen telling fans that he's fine under the circumstances being, of course, a shock heart attack on the pitch ahead of a UEFA football match. And Lape, I mean, it's good to hear that he's on the mend, because that really was a very shocking event to happen. I don't think I've ever seen anyone collapse on a football pitch like that.
Julie, I watched that match with my husband, and I was very shocked. I mean, it was very harrowing to see the way in which he collapsed, but the solidarity from the fans, as well as the players, forming that wall around him to protect his private moment was really heartwarming. And it was lovely to see him alive once again when he was being taken off the pitch. And then this picture was so heartwarming. And I think it really raises the concerns around health in football and in sports at large. And the last time actually this happened in football, if my memory is not deceiving me here, was Fabrice Muamba. When he was playing, he also collapsed and had a cardiac arrest and had to have a pacemaker fitted in. And since then, we've seen the campaign for that increase severely, especially in the sport of football. And we know part of Mr. Eriksen's incident was that the doctors were able to use a defibrillator. I think once it was reported that it was used to revive him, which was amazing, because a lot of the times that's not always the case. I mean, a lot of players have died in football as a result of this, but it has once again raised the awareness surrounding.
I was going to say, who knew it was such a potentially fatal game? And I think one of the things that a lot of people are talking about, and I don't know what you think about this, Ryan, is that there was a debate about whether the match should have gone ahead after that incident, and it was, of course, restarted. It was started a short time later. What do you think about that decision?
Well, look, I think the decision to, suspend play when it was suspended was a no-brainer, right? Whether they were to resume play, I don't really have a huge problem with that. I'm not even sure that he would have a huge problem with that, or his family, because at the end of the day, he did get the help that he needed. And I think actually that's the remarkable part of this story, is that, for these top athletes, there is this medical attention, medical care available to them to pull them back from the brink. I mean, and maybe we should see more of that, defibrillators at stadiums. That would be something that should be not just, in Premier League stadiums, but in, at football fields and pitches around, the world, because
we're looking at pictures right now, live pictures coming to us from Munich in Germany. Sorry, I'm terrible at football matches. This is another football match that's going on. Tell me again, what is it? France versus
Germany. The Euros currently.
Germany, yeah. And it illustrates just the huge demand there is to see live football matches. So I'm guessing that any decision to cancel it would have been difficult.
Yeah, there was a kid just like a week ago here in the UK that died from the very same issue on the pitch. And, he didn't have the same, obviously, medical attention that these footballers get. And so, it's a serious issue. They're in extraordinary shape. But these things happen, and it's important that they get the medical attention that they need. It's beautiful to see that happened in this case, and it's great to hear that the guy's now, in the hospital, but joking about it, and in a position to, say hello to all the fans.
And giving a great big thumbs up. So hopefully not too long before he's back on the pitch again. Thank you, both of you, Ryan and Lape. Good to have you on Behind the Headlines.